Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining another Cyber Skyline Live. I'm Franz Pear with Cyber Skyline, and I'm here to help you learn cybersecurity. We run these episodes for you, so please stick to the end and let us know what topics you want us to cover next. This week's topic is manipulating web cookies. And I'm just going to jump straight into my slides, but please ask any questions you have as we walk through today's show. All right. So, what are web cookies? Um, So the reason why web cookies exist is because the HTTP protocol is stateless. The HTTP protocol is what is used to view websites. That's the protocol that your browser will use to communicate with the web server and vice versa. And because it is stateless, there's basically no memory between the different requests that are sent back and forth between the browser and the web server. Um, Now, this is a problem because if you are using a website, you want the server to remember who you are because anything that requires a login, say you're shopping on Amazon, if you send a request to add something to your cart and then you hit another request to go to checkout and the server cannot remember that the person who added that item to the cart is the same person who's trying to check out from the cart, then you're not going to be able to have a checkout process. So that's why it's really important. The HTTP protocol does not have the property of being able to associate multiple requests with the same user. This idea of keeping a session or keeping state, it doesn't have that as a basic property of the protocol. And that's why web cookies exist. These cookies are just small bits of information that are stored in the web browser. And whenever your browser then makes a request to the server, it can include those little bits of information with every single request. And this is what allows the server to identify requests as coming from the same user. So, as a very basic example, the way that this works is that the web server will send a set cookie header when it wants the client browser to save some information as a cookie, and the client will then send that back as a cookie header in its request to the website. I have this little example as a little, how do you actually go about logging in and how is that information stored? So the way this works is you want to log into a website. Your browser will create a post request. Maybe it's going to slash login. That's this top item on here. So your browser says, "Hi, I would like to log in. Here are my credentials." The web server will verify that those credentials are correct. And then once it verifies that those credentials are correct, it will send back a set cookie header that says, "Hey, um, save this information. Save the fact that your session.id is equal to this string, this P0D7, whatever this is, right?" And whenever you make another request to the website, mention that this is your session ID, and then I will remember who you are. And you can see here that in the in the next request, the client tries to get to the admin page, and it sets that cookie header to have that information for the session ID. Now, different servers, different websites can decide what they want to use as the name of their session cookie. They might have multiple different cookies as well. Google Analytics, a lot of tracking uses cookies, and that's how they're able to identify you. These cookies really are providing the memory on the internet. Now, this is a very, very rudimentary way of handling sessions using cookies. It's probably the most basic way that people will do it. There isn't a whole lot more that goes on, uh, like complexity wise, to make this more secure. To make this more secure, all you'd basically do is use SSL, make sure that this information is encrypted so that people can't see these cookies. But let's dive in a little bit deeper into how you might exploit some cookies. The biggest way that cookies can be exploited is by the fact that, hey, this is actually just information that is being tacked onto your requests. And you can edit the cookies in your browser. You can also create your own custom HTTP requests and put in whatever cookie you want. And so there are two primary ways you can exploit this. One is if these cookies are storing anything to do with some settings or some permissions, an attacker can modify them, right? They can go into browser and edit the cookies in the browser so all those requests will have a different value with that cookie. Or if they manage to copy someone else's cookie, they can impersonate that person. So let's just pretend that there's no HTTPS. Everything's just HTTP. There's no encryption on the internet. It could be possible if you are listening onto someone's network. Maybe you've pwned their router. Maybe you're the ISP, their internet provider. You can see all of these HTTP requests coming in to and from this website and this client. You can intercept that information and you can see, oh, Bob over here is making a request to the server and he logged into that server and the server gave him the session cookie. And if I copy that cookie, I can pretend to be Bob because this cookie, the session ID, is the only thing that is being used by the website to know that these requests are coming from Bob. And it doesn't even need to be that complicated. I described a man in the middle attack. Basically, an attacker would need to get in the middle of the requests coming to and from a website and a client. But there's also some cookie stealing attacks, which basically involve um, an attack where you are doing cross-site scripting, and you can actually make a website send the user's cookies to you. So as an example, let's just say that there's a forum on the internet, and this forum allows you to put in JavaScript code. You can write JavaScript code which tells anyone who visits your post on that forum, take all of the cookies from this website and send that data to the hacker's website, the attacker's website. So now anyone who visits that forum post is just taking all their cookies, sending it to an attacker, and then that attacker can then copy the cookies, the session IDs, and pretend to be that user and do something nefarious. The forum is a rather benign example, but imagine this happens with a bank or with some more sensitive information. Maybe it's login for some corporate network. It is possible for a hacker to steal the cookies, impersonate that person, and log in as them without knowing their username or password. They can just take the cookies and suddenly they have access to the website. So that's why cookies are super important and why you have to be careful to make sure that your cookies don't get stolen. But you can see here in the screenshot, we actually have a challenge that we can play with and show you exactly how these attacks work. So this screenshot is from the practice gym on the Skyline platform. And basically there's an admin panel there that we are going to mess with the cookies on that website and be able to get admin permissions without even getting the username or the password for the admin user. As I'm switching over to the demo, please ask any questions you have about cookies, and I'll stop quickly to answer those questions. All right. So you can see here right now that we've got the gym open, and if I go to this site, I'm going to open this site in a new tab. And I'm going to start analyzing what is happening on this website. We know that this is our target. This is the website that we want to exploit. And we can see that there's a login form. And actually, I think the questions here are asking, what is the flag obtained from logging in? So our goal is to figure out how do we break into this website and effectively get to log in. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to right click and pop open the view page source. And you can see that this is not a very long HTML file. You can see here that there's not a whole lot of JavaScript code directly in the page. I can see there's a form, use form ID login form. Here's the username and password, the forget password button, and then the login button. All this information is here. And at the top, you can see there's the CSS file. CSS files are used for styling. Those are not going to be particularly important when you're trying to analyze the security of a website. And I can see here that there is a jQuery.min.js file. This is a common library used in JavaScript, which has a bunch of utility functions. And so we're actually not particularly interested in that either. And it looks like there's another jQuery. And then there is this login.js script. Now, this one looks a little bit more interesting. Maybe there's some useful information that we can look at in this script to find a vulnerability in the website. So I'm going to open this up. And this is also a very short file. You can see here that it says document on ready. So when the document is ready, it says login button on click. So the code that happens in these parentheses executes when you click on that login button. And then it says data is the login form.serialize. This basically just takes all the information from that login form and puts it as a variable. It serializes that information. And it puts it in a format that we can then use to send in a request. And we can see this $post. I happen to know that this $post, this $ is referring to jQuery. If you didn't know what this was, you could just right click on this and you could just go and Google it and see. I might need to put the $ in quotes so Google knows what I'm looking for. Oh, maybe that's not working either. If I typed in JavaScript. So if I type in JavaScript here, you can see jQuery post, and you can see these examples, which look very, very similar to the code that we're looking at. And what does this do? It says load data from the server using an HTTP post request. So this is creating an HTTP post request. So we see a post request for /login, and then it also includes the data, this data information. And it says when it's done, it tries to go to the admin panel. Oh, okay. If done executes successfully, it will try to go to the admin panel. If it fails, you'll get a pop-up that says incorrect login credentials. So let's actually try to see if we can identify that. I'm going to use F12 to open up the developer tools. I can also do right-click, inspect. This will also accomplish the same thing. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the network tab because I want to see all of the requests that will be sent. Allegedly, based on this code, when I put in some information, I hit login, it will send a post request and we should be able to see that post request. So I'm going to type in admin password as my login information. And you can see we got a little pop-up, incorrect login credentials, which is what we expect here, right? This is incorrect login credentials. And if I open and expand my network tab, I can see here that there is a request for login. Here's my request. I can see there is a UID here, user equals admin, password equals pass equals password. And then the response that we get back is 403 forbidden. So this was the failure, and that's why we got that little pop-up. All right. So this is the post request that's being made. Let's dive into this a little bit deeper. So there isn't anything immediately obvious for how we might exploit this login panel because it just says login and you just put in an admin and like a username and password. There isn't anything here that indicate like what that login information might be. We can't tell what the username might be or the password might be from this information. So we need to look elsewhere. But we know specifically that when we try to log in, we put in this information to the form, we hit this little button, it will send a post request. If it is successful, it will take us to the admin page. And if it's not successful, then it will go to make this little pop-up that says invalid login credentials. All right. So now that we've looked through all the code here, we need to look for any other things that are saved that we can manipulate. So if I go and expand my dev tools a little bit, you can just jump through these tabs. These elements, this is the source code. We can skip that. This one's the console. I don't know what the recorder does. I think this does performance measurement. That's not useful. This is a listing of the sources, is a listing of all the assets that get loaded on the page. Here's the network tab again, performance, you can skip. Memory, this actually stores the current state of the memory. And then in here we have application. And you can see some interesting information on this left side. So we can see under storage, there's local storage, which looks like it's empty. There's session storage, which also looks empty. And then we have cookies. And I can see here that there's a cookie that's name is admin, and the value is false. So that seems a little bit suspicious. I I wonder what happens if we just change this value. We say the value is true, and I just changed it to true. It turned red. I don't know what that means, but I'm gonna give it a shot. I'm gonna see what happens when I refresh now that I've made the value true. It looks like it didn't stick. So it didn't like that I tried to edit this. What if I try this again? True? Nope, it doesn't like it. All right. So we know we want to try to mess with this, but it's not currently working for us. Let's go in Google and figure out if we can change the cookie some other way. So if I go and do a Google search, change website cookie JavaScript. Let me see if I can find some JavaScript that will allow us to change the cookie. Okay. So we can write a new cookie by saying document.cookie equals new cookie. Let me just see if I can find an example so I can copy and paste it and save ourselves some time. All right. So let's give this a shot. So I am now in the console section and I'm going to execute this JavaScript code, and hopefully this JavaScript code will allow us to update our cookie. So now I'm taking that code here, document.cookie. The default example they have here is username equals John Doe. We want to do instead admin is false, is true. So let's try admin is true, refresh the page, and you can see here now it says admin true. So cool, we've managed to edit our cookies, but now what? Like we don't, it still looks the same. I don't see anything different on this page. There's no flag that showed up. Um, like I need to know what the next step is. Now, something that might be a tip off is earlier we looked at the source code for the JavaScript and we saw here that when you log in, if it fails, it gives you this pop-up, but if it's successful, it will move you to the /admin page. So the admin page is something that it takes you to after you log in. And if we think we've managed to give ourselves admin permissions, we should attempt to go to that page and see what happens. So let me go in here and I'm going to type in /admin. I'm going to hit enter. And all of a sudden you can see there's some sort of dashboard here. And at the very top of this is new flag. And here's an answer. And if I copy this and I paste this in here, I'm going to get that correct. So we were able to manipulate our cookies to basically trick the server into thinking we had admin permissions. And then we figured out where the admin panel was from looking at the source code. And that's how we're able to exploit this website. Now, this is an example of a website that has really, really, really bad security. I wouldn't expect very many websites to do something like this because it's so trivial to exploit. But what is more likely is that you could probably steal someone's session, their cookie. You could steal it and then impersonate them. This would require you to have a second attack to get that cookie from them so you can change your own cookie and log in as them. That's a little bit more complicated out of scope for today because it's supposed to be more entry level topic. But this is basically something that you can do to impersonate someone else, is stealing their cookies, changing the cookies to match the information necessary to trick the website. Now I'm going to go through and I'm going to look through everyone's questions and start answering them in the chat. We've got a question here from Betty. Are cookies only accessible in Chrome? No, they should work in basically any major web browser. You just need to figure out how to get to the developer tools, and you should be able to see the cookies there. I don't know what the reason was for why I couldn't edit my cookies directly from the developer tools, but at the very least, you could pull up a JavaScript console and write some JavaScript code to edit your cookies. Lizzie is asking, can you put a link for this lab? So this link is going to be a little bit different depending on which event you're participating in with us. But the way that you would get to this is go to the practice gym, the practice environment for your event, and then you would go to the web application security category and or web application exploitation category. And then this will be the eGov Easy challenge. It's the first challenge in this category. I'll post the link to this for this. This is the link for this season's NCL challenge. But if you're watching this video and post, that link might not work for you depending on if you're doing an NCL competition or if it's a different season. All right. So hopefully this was pretty straightforward. If you have any additional questions about cookies, I'm happy to answer them. Please let me know if you've played with cookies before, if you had any trouble with cookies. If you don't understand how they work, I can give additional clarification as well. Another cool thing that you can do with cookies is uh, try to delete them and see how easily they come back. Like if you try to delete like the Google Analytics and all that, they come back immediately. So that's probably why, if you're wondering like why do I keep getting tracked by all these different websites, that's because of it. The websites that can actually save cookies to the way that like the cookie security works is that the any resource on a website can save cookies for the domain that the resource was loaded from. That's a little bit of a complicated way of saying if you load JavaScript from cyberskyline.com, then cyberskyline cookies can be saved with any cyberskyline code that was loaded. If someone's website also loads Google Analytics code, then that means Google Analytics can save cookies on that web page. Even though you're not going to googleanalytics.com or google.com, if the website is using Google Analytics, that gives Google the ability to save cookies on your browser and track what websites you're viewing. It can see that these cookies were loaded on this website. And that's why even if you don't use Google at all, it's impossible to avoid the Google tracking because a lot of websites out there will use Google Analytics. And when they use Google Analytics, they use Google code, and the Google code will store cookies on behalf of Google on your browser, even without you wanting it to. And it's a little bit annoying, but it's very difficult to kind of exist and actually use the internet without accepting the fact that a lot of these tracking cookies are out there. I'm seeing another question from Betty. What resources do you recommend for learning to pen test like a pro? That's a pretty big question out there. I'd ask a lot of people in the chat to provide their suggestions. I'm seeing suggestions for Pico CTF and Bandit. There's also Over the Wire. That's another website to try. I would recommend kind of going and trying to do a lot of CTFs that are out there. There's a ton. If you go to CTF Time, you can go and see what CTFs are out there. And then there's endless resources. If you Google it, you can give it a shot. I would recommend trying to figure out what specific niche within cybersecurity or pen testing you're interested in doing. Like, are you doing generic, like, let me pen test applications, or are you pen testing a website, a web server? There's different skill sets that you'd want to learn, and that might help guide you in terms of figuring out which resources are going to be useful. Another question from Jordan. In the inspect window, are the only tabs worth looking at application and network? Um, For the most part, that's what I typically spend the most time on. There's also that console tab, although you can see here there's a split view where it has like the tab on the top half and then the console on the bottom half. Sometimes the elements tab is helpful if you want to, let's just say, for example, I want to figure out where the code for this um, link is being stored. I can do inspect element and I can see exactly this. And this might be helpful if you're trying to like find all of the code that is associated with something on the page. It'll only show you HTML code and won't show you any JavaScript code, but this might be helpful for you to see how the page is laid out. In addition to that, the sources tab might also be helpful. So if you are looking at a website that loads a bunch of different external files, a lot of JavaScript, a lot of CSS, if you go to the network tab, this might get very populated and it might be annoying to try to look through everything in here and find what you're looking for. And the sources tab is a little bit more organized and it might help you find what you're looking for a little bit more easily. Dante's asking, how do cookies work in terms of remembering login passwords? So in as a good security practice, cookies should never remember login passwords. Keep in mind that cookies are being stored in plain text in the browser. So if someone has control of a physical device and there are passwords being stored in the cookies on that physical device, then it means that anyone who compromises that account can extract all of those passwords. So it depends on how someone codes their website. They could do it in a very insecure manner. They could save passwords in cookies. It is a terrible idea because it opens up a huge amount of security risk. In addition to that, cookies are being sent every single time you request something on a website, and that opens up a huge security risk as well. So, in theory, cookies should not have anything to do with storing login passwords. The way that remembering login passwords work is actually the browser will offer to store that information and it will hopefully store it in an encrypted database in the browser and it won't be in cookies. Cookies are plain text. So if you ever log in and it says, hey, do you want me to remember your password? It has nothing to do with the cookies. It is being stored in the browser in its encrypted vault. Now, when you log in after you provide your password, the website will send you that session ID and it will save the session ID as the thing in your cookies, right? So your password isn't being saved, and this means that if your cookies are ever stolen, the attacker can log in with as you temporarily. Once you log out and that session ID becomes invalid, they won't be able to impersonate you anymore. And more importantly, they won't have your password. And this is really important if you do something bad like copy and share passwords between different websites. They at least won't have that password to try to use to log into other sites. Isaac is asking, as a customer, are there any security measures I can take to ensure my cookies are secure or that the only I'm not sure what the second half of the question is asking. Is that the only is that only the responsibility of the organization? So there are there really isn't anything that you can do as the customer to make yourself more secure when it comes to cookies. That is 100% the responsibility of the company's website, that the organization behind that website. There are things that you can do to see if they are using cookies properly. One thing that you could do is you can check to see what information are they storing in the cookies. Are they storing sensitive information in the cookies? In my response to the previous question, we are talking about you should never store passwords in cookies. Well, if you open up the cookies and then you see someone is storing passwords in the cookies, that's an indication that this website's not very trustworthy. I would try to avoid using them if possible. It's a very, very bad security practice. Now, what can you do about it? absolutely nothing other than don't use the website. So it is really the responsibility of that organization. You can't do anything to change the security other than don't use the service. However, you can look at something like that. You could also see if any of that information expires. So in theory, login credentials, the session that you have with your login should expire over time to make sure that if someone was able to steal your cookies and impersonate you, they wouldn't be able to do that forever. It would have an expiration, and then after the expiration kicks in, you have to log in again. If you've ever used online banking, you've probably seen your session only lasts like 15, 30 minutes and you have to log in again. That's because they're being very, very strict about the expiration on their login cookie, their session cookie. Some websites don't have any expiration at all, and that's generally considered insecure because it means that a hacker could steal your cookies and have your session indefinitely. And there should be some sort of expiration to reduce the risk and the damage that might occur. And Nick is asking, what about different browsers? Do you have any browser recommendations, favorites, etc., especially for hacking? So I personally use Chrome or Brave, the Brave browser. I find that generally speaking, you just want to avoid, I think, Internet Explorer. Internet Explorer is kind of deprecated. All the other browsers are good to use. I don't have any issues with any of those browsers. Are good in terms of usability. Internet Explorer just has so many problems with like websites not working properly or like just some weird funkiness. I've seen it all the time with Internet Explorer. Now, when it comes to any recommendations on what's best for hacking, I think that they're all basically the same. I think Safari's developer tools, the last I used them, they had fewer tools than, for example, Chrome and Firefox, although I don't see a huge issue with those either. If you are doing something really sophisticated with like web security and the basic developer tools in Safari aren't going to cut it, then you probably want to use some specialized tool like Zap or Burp Suite so that you're not limited by what the browser can do. You probably want to use something more sophisticated. So in general, if you find that developer tools are not good enough for your hacking purposes, then you probably want to stop using developer tools and use a specialized web security tool. Now, when it comes to like daily use in terms of like what's best for you to use personally, if you are very concerned about privacy, I think Brave is probably the way to go. It has a lot of it automatically blocks a lot of the, like the ad tracking for you by default, and it's probably the most privacy conscious thing out there. Chrome is probably the worst in terms of privacy. All of your information, all of your browsing information is very easily going to get to Google somehow, some way or another, and Chrome is probably not the best browser to use if that's your main concern. But it really depends on personal preference. I'd say if you're worried about like what browser is best for hacking, I'd say just avoid Internet Explorer. Everything else should be pretty good. And if the browser tools are not good enough, you need a specialized web security tool. All right. Oh, another question as well. L is asking, is Brave better than DuckDuckGo? I don't know. I mean, it's a little bit comparing apples versus oranges. Like Brave is a web browser and DuckDuckGo is a search engine. So you can use both of them at the same time. You don't have to choose one or the other. Um, so I mean, if you're worried about privacy, I'd say just you're better off using both. I don't see any reason to try to compare them. Is one better than the other in terms of privacy? Jordan's asking, is closing your browser after each site you visit a good way to prevent cookies from tracking you from site to site? Um, no, because by default, cookies will persist between browsing sessions. So even if you close out your browser, open it again, those cookies will still persist. The exception to that is if you're using like incognito mode, then it will actually clear your cookies. between those different sessions, right? So if you open incognito, you go to some websites, you close incognito, you open incognito again, you browse some websites, it will help reduce the tracking between those two interactions. However, there might be tracking that occurs other than just the cookies. So, for example, there might be different tracking services that are seeing, hey, these requests are coming from the same IP. I bet they're from the same person. And even without cookies, they can kind of try to associate who you are. The tracking from cookies will at least be eliminated if you do that. But just keep in mind, all of the pages that you're visiting before you clear out those cookies by closing incog and opening it again, all that's still occurring. So if I, visit 3 pages and there's some cookie tracking going on, it you can see those 3 pages happening every time. If your strategy is, hey, let me just like don't store cookies at all, then that will basically remove the functionality of you to do anything to do with a login. So, that's the problem. You really cannot avoid cookie tracking without making your life kind of hell in terms of trying to use the internet. It's just not possible, and it's not practical in most circumstances. Betty's asking, is there a URL? Is there a place that lists the various pen testing niches? I don't have anything off the top of my head. Definitely, if anyone has suggestions about like where can you go to find like different specializations within pen testing, um, please answer in the chat. I think that's something where you probably just need to Google for it. Let me see if I can um, you know types of pen testing skills is just what I'm going to Google. Yeah, so I just Googled this really quick. Network penetration, you have website and wireless penetration, physical penetration, social engineering, um, trying to like pen test cloud setups. These are all like just different types of pen testing. I mean, this one has 25, there's even more. Yeah, I don't know if there's like a definitive list for this. I would just recommend doing some Google searching. All right. Well, please suggest any ideas that you have for future episodes. Normally, I put up a poll, but the poll options are only going to tell me what people like from the options that I give them. So please ask us broadly in the chat. What do you want us to cover in future episodes? I'm open to any crazy ideas and suggestions. We have been covering a lot of basic skills recently. Um, I'm happier to go into some more advanced concepts as well, but I'm not going to go jump all the way to like some binary reverse engineering right away. I think we're going to need to work our way up there. But if there's any specific topic that like you've been stumped on and you don't know how to approach it, please ask us in the chat, and we will try to cover some of these in future episodes. But once again, thanks for joining us today. I'm Franz Pear from Cyber Skyline. Really hope that you are excited about your journey about becoming a cybersecurity professional. And join us again next episode for additional learning and additional topics. So thank you very much and good night.